Hey, it's Bill Meeks. Today I have an exciting interview with the super talented and super silly Scott Johnson. Scott's a professional cartoonist and podcaster. Sit back and listen as we look at AI art from a digital artist perspective today on Building Dreams. This episode of Building Dreams is brought to you by the new Everly Heights Patreon. Get access to the custom Stable Diffusion models we're using to build Everly Heights by supporting us at patreon.com/Everly Heights. And by StreamYard. Use it like I am to bring your streams to life. Get $10 in free credit by going to streamyard.everlyheights.tv to sign up. Hey Scott, welcome to Building Dreams. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I don't know if we've ever gotten to do this before, so this feels like a long time coming.
Yeah, I feel like I think I've been a guest on one or two of your shows, like maybe Current Geek back in the day, but I don't think you've ever guested on mine. So.
No, it's been a lot of, like, we have a lot of shared minutia, you and I, with the people we work with. Some of our audience is shared, and then it just hit me the other day when we were planning this. I'm like, I don't think I've ever really had this kind of one-on-one with you before. So this is nice. I'm really glad you asked me on.
Yeah, I hope I don't disturb you too much by the end of it. I'll do my best to keep things relatively normal.
Awesome.
You know, we're here to talk a little bit about AI art and generative AI art and everything. But before we get into the AI of it all, why don't you go ahead and give us a rundown of your history in traditional and digital visual arts?
Okay, sure. So there may be some people even hear this, are like, wait a minute, I didn't know he even did that. But about 50% of my work in business is in illustration, comic art, that sort of thing, and I've been doing it forever. I went to college for visual arts. I've been drawing since I was, 7 or 8 years old. Always had a sketchbook with me. Very traditional beginnings to all of that. Back in the day when we didn't have things like Wacom tablets and iPad Pros and stuff like that. So a very different time. Lots of traditional media and that sort of thing, and that's sort of what I was raised on, trained on. Mm-hmm. And as far as my own preferences, I kind of settled into inking, a lot of ink and pencil work and color work. And when digital art came around and we could start using those as our tools, that was a huge day for me because it meant no more stocking up on paper and Bristol board and no more stocking up on 1,000 pens and inks and a million other things I didn't have to worry about anymore.
Just put a couple grand into a computer and you're good to go.
Yeah, you're good to go. Especially these days, you even spend a little less. In fact, my poor Wacom collects dust over there now because I use my iPad Pro and Procreate almost exclusively now for almost everything I do because it's that capable, and I really like it. But that's kind of where I've always sort of stayed up on what was new. So when it made sense to get into airbrushing because that was the hot thing, I got into that. Mm-hmm. When digital first, cracked an eye open back in the very, very early aughts, I was on it. I was like, yep, I'm getting into this, whatever it takes. And back then it was like tablets where you had to draw blind. There was no screens. So you just had a tablet and you had to look at your screen while you drew on the tablet. And it was a weird skill to develop, but I went through all of that and I've stayed with it.
I've never actually been able to get the hang of using a tablet. I don't know what it is. It's just something like I can use like a tablet if it's not a screen.
Yeah.
If it's just like on the side and I'm just like using it as sort of like a human interface device or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. But I don't know, for some reason, like drawing on the actual screen, just like, I don't know, it throws me off somehow.
Yeah, no, I get it. A lot of people struggle with that early on. I did as well. Some of the ways I would cover for that is I would buy these screen protectors that were textured like paper. And that would help because there is a big jump from going to the feel of, say, graphite on paper, which has kind of a coarse drag to everything, than to a perfectly smooth screen surface with a plastic nub for a pen.
It's like driving on an ice rink.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. It felt weird. It felt slippery. It's like the Mario snow levels. You don't want to really play those, So I got used to it though, and I started using screen covers and things in various ways. But today, it's indiscernible to me. And even when I jump back and forth, go from paper to tablet to paper, sometimes I try to pinch and zoom on paper, and that's a problem because I'm so used to it, or undoing very quickly with a couple of finger taps. Can't do that. on paper. So yeah, habits are there, but I've spent all of that many, well, I guess it's been multiple decades, at least 3 decades almost, strictly as a digital artist. And really the difference between the two is very, very minimal. It's mostly the convenience that comes from not having a bunch of messy media like paint and everything to work with, but still achieving the same results. Was a big boon for me in terms of workflow and how much I could do and how much more I could do. And it's the standard. It's what everyone does to now. If you work professionally in art, that's what you do. Which brings us to current, where I still do this, where we're now being faced with new tools every day, as you are aware, that are in one way or another either helping artists or challenging artists. And I have a lot of thoughts about that. Yeah, sometimes both. Sometimes at the exact same time.
Now, just to go back into the past, just very briefly here, like when everyone started using tablets and everything, did you have any resistance to it as an artist, or did you notice resistance to digital technologies from other artists at that time period?
Oh, for sure. And I still have some friends that refuse to do it. They're very, I wouldn't call them troglodytes, but they're just very, or Luddites, the word, not troglodyte. That is the wrong word. They're cavemen, basically. No, they have very, very, been very resistant to it from the very beginning. I was not, because I tend to, to me, it was obvious very early that you get on board with this or you're behind. Like, you just don't, this is no different than when they figured out how to go from papyrus and stuff mashed together to create quote unquote paper to actual pressed paper from a paper mill.
Yeah.
To any tools, drawing on caves, to then doing it on tablets, to then whatever. If you look at any era of time, visual art, especially, a person with some sort of implement on a surface, has changed very little ultimately in what the job is. It's just the tools to do the job have evolved. And I don't see this as any different. It's easy to look at it and go, we rely too much on technology. I understand that sentiment. I totally get it. But for me, this was a clear path to what's next. Like, this had to be the way to go. And the thing was, I could always go back. Like, It's not like I can't still pull out a canvas and whip out a painting. In fact, do sometimes, because it's good to stay, grounded in that stuff. But I can't tell you how much mess I save, how much literally money I save on canvases aren't cheap. I buy a decent canvas at a decent size. You're spending $100 just for the canvas. It doesn't count all the paint, doesn't count all the time, doesn't count all the waiting for it to dry and the layering of paint and all the other crap you got to do that I can kind of avoid and still achieve this stuff. And some people say, well, that sounds like cheating. Well, it's not. It's just it's like anything. It's like saying, well, you survived the flu because you took a flu shot versus my ancestors who survived it but almost died. Well, okay. We make advancements to make things better, easier for everyone. And to me, in the art world anyway, this has been that.
Yeah. So when did you first become aware of generative AI art? I know it's still like super recent. I think it really just kind of kicked off really about a year ago. But when did you first become aware of it? What were your first initial impressions of it?
I guess the first thing I really saw was that DALL-E 1 stuff that was, people could use for free. And it would do 4 very small resolution squares of what it thought you were asking it to draw. That was probably my first exposure to it. And like everyone else, there's a real novelty to it at first. It's like, oh, this is funny. Show me, I don't know, Bernie Sanders eating a lot of bananas or something. And then it would do that, right? And you'd get some pretty funny, hilarious results. And
I did a lot of Obama holding koalas. Like, that was my
exactly.
thing. Yeah,
that sounds great. For some reason or another, we all put a political figure in here. I don't know why, but we had a pretty good idea then, I think. And I think it's come to fruition that was just the very, very early rough beginning, and that these models were going to get very good. They were going to get very good very quickly, and we were going to get to a place where it'd be hard to deny the technology's ability to render, even in some cases hyper realistic versions of what people put in their prompts. But then all the way down to every stylized choice, making it look like other artists, which, gets into some of the issues I have with the technology. But for the most part, it's kind of gone the way I thought it would go in a very short amount of time. And I think it still has leaps and bounds to go. I think we're going to start to see this in video way more. We already are.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like Stable Video Diffusion just dropped a couple weeks ago, and it's crazy.
It is crazy what that thing does. Like, it's gone so
Yeah.
far from the real glitchy, weird stuff early on to something I could actually see. That's the one thing, is I actually think some of the best art that AI is producing, and I say that in quotes because duping somebody's style or doing a realistic photo image of somebody who's famous or something, I don't consider that art. I consider that just replicating based on its data replication.
Yeah.
And it's fine for what it is. But I actually feel that the art might come from the weird video side where nothing makes sense, stuff's morphing in and out of weird places. They're doing things with that I've never seen before. And that to me is a new kind of art. It's very different art, and how it's generated is different, and all those other things. I don't find it nearly as controversial, though, because it's new. It's doing something new visually that makes me feel a way when I see it. I feel a way I've not felt before with visual mediums. That I can't think of a better definition of art than that. So it's weird because people ask me this question all the time. How do you feel about these art generators? Well, I think some of it sucks. Some of it's terrible. Some of it's just lazy. Some of it, most of it, by the way, I can pick out anytime I see it. It's not hard to know. And that's the one thing. Everybody keeps thinking this stuff is looking better and better, and technically it is, but you can still tell. And I don't mean it's like Uncanny Valley. I mean, I can just immediately look at the image and go, well, that's AI and that one's not. I just know intuitively. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I actually think that will probably continue to be the same. Now, if you're just doing cursory looks at something, you might miss it if you're not really paying attention. But I've seen stuff where I just went, oh, of course that's AI. And other people are like, wait, really? That looks like a photograph. No, that's freaking AI. And then you find out later it was, or you zoom in and find out the Pope's got 8 fingers and the donkey behind him has 3 ears by accident. These aren't supposed to happen that way. And the technology still has its glitches, but even as those start to clear up, I think I just think we're gonna know. I'm less worried about how convincing AI image generation is. I'm more concerned about idiots who fall for it, because to me they're the problem, not the images. Because I don't think it's that hard to tell. And even if I can't tell, I hope anyway humanity grows some critical thinking and doesn't automatically assume things like that must be real or this must be fake. And if you're not sure, you do your homework, you do your digging, you find out. And that's kind of my attitude toward that end of this spectrum a little bit.
So you're concerned about the side that could, promote disinformation and, that sort of thing more so than necessarily people using it as a tool, or?
Yeah, because, okay, so I'll give you an example of how I use it as a tool. Some of this may surprise people, I don't know. But the other day, I was having the hardest time coming up with a reference photo for how I wanted to create a Santa Claus. So I'm doing 25 days of Santa Claus in December. Every day I do a Santa Claus drawing. It's something different every time. Sometimes they're weird and wacky. Sometimes they're kind of standard. But every day I try a different idea. And just the other day I was like, well, I've never drawn Santa Claus fencing. It sounds like a weird thing to say, right? So I want him fencing with like his foil or his sword thing will be an actual candy cane, all striped. And I wanted to be, but what I was looking for was a pose that was very typical of an actual fencer. And everything I was finding as reference photos and stuff, like, I don't like any of these. I don't want to draw it from this angle. I want to do it from that thing or whatever. And I just didn't like any of them. So I went into, what did I use? Oh, I just used the stuff that's built into Bing.
Okay, the image creator.
The image creator in Bing. And I said, I guess I have enough points or whatever to hate the point. The point system is a whole other thing. I feel like it's like text messages in the 90s. We're going to get to a point where that sounds really stupid that we're charging for points. But anyway, I said, can I get a great side shot of very traditional fencer, like old school? like something you might see in an old 20s film or something. I wanted that kind of level. And it did exactly what I asked it for. It made what looked like an old photograph. You could tell it was AI, but
Yeah.
an old photograph, kind of a side view of kind of an on guard thing, hand up here, sword out front. And it was perfect. And it beat any other photo I had to find and saved me a ton of time. So I parked that thing up in a little thumbnail space in the corner and used it as my reference as I sketched out my pencil, and ended up being exactly what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So that the use case in that case has been very good for me. I just did one today where I'm trying to do a showdown on an Old West, middle of like Main Street Old West town, where you might have a gun. What do you call it? Like a standoff. And what I was looking for is just kind of the feeling of what did one of those streets look like? It's muddy, wagon wheels parked on the side of the thing, stores jutting out. Like there's a hardware store and there's the saloon. And, I just wanted that perspective to get my brain going. So I fired one of those up and it was like, oh, yeah, no, this is perfect. So once again, I've got a great reference image that I can look at and go, okay, yeah, I like this, I like that, and still do all my normal stuff. I have a better time creating some of the stuff I need to get going or to get references for, especially with commissions.
Yeah.
I'm not using the art they give me, but I am using that and saying, well, I don't like the front image. Can I get a 3/4 view of this same scene? Boom, it can poop it out. And now I can say, oh, you know what? I am going to do it from that angle because this is a better thing. That saves me a ton of sketch and rewrite and all that other time.
Yeah, it's something I would assume traditionally you would go to, like, I don't know, Google Images for. You'd have a personal library of like magazine clippings with references, but now you can just kind of like spin up your own.
Yeah, it used to be. So they had a name for this. It was called your morgue, like almost like it's like death. But back in the day, it was called a morgue. And I had a teacher in junior high who first taught me about this, and we had to keep one. Basically, it was a big drawer, like a cabinet drawer full of magazine clippings, like you said, images for reference that you found somewhere, photos you'd taken yourself and then, developed and then put in there. And then that was your place. And you could have it in there under animals or under people or whatever. And that was like your way of having your reference material. Obviously, it's a very arduous task to manage one of those things in the modern day, especially. Like, why would the crap would we do that? The internet made that easier overall so that you could keep a digital morgue pretty simply. But what this provides me is a real-time morgue. I don't have to have a bunch of references. I just have to kind of have in my head what I'm looking for, and it will give me some semblance of that. It's never good enough, but it's always enough for me to go, okay, cool, I can start here, and I can keep moving. And so I think a lot of artists, this is the part people don't talk about, there's a lot of sort of interim parts of their jobs as artists that this is helping, but maybe not in the ways people think. People think we're going straight from, I used to draw this, to now I type it out and it poops it out for me. It isn't really happening that way on the ground, if that makes sense.
In my opinion and my experience and everything, a lot of artists are just using it to sort of like make the boring parts of art creation more efficient. The stuff like looking for references or, just do basic scene composition to build on, that sort of thing. Like it gives you more room and opportunity to explore ideas without a sort of a limiting yourself, being limited by time. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're giving too much credit to this idea. This may be controversial, I don't know. But maybe too much credit to the idea that people are simply going in, getting great at prompt work, thinking that makes them an artist, and then having the final work poop out from the computer and say, well, there it is, I've done it, isn't this amazing? That is a very short-lived, very narrow piece of interest. Like that's fun for a internet post that says, I told it I wanted to combine Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, and look what it did to Yoda. Like, that's fun. That's a fun thing to screw around with.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually get anything done. There's no workflow there. I mean, there is, but there's no workflow toward any goal there. It's not like anybody was asking for this, and it's not like you're going to go around and sell a ton of those, because guess what? Everybody can make them. So it's not that big a deal. The thing I think people miss is that is a very shallow end of the pool. And that exists no matter what. Whenever there's a new thing, a new technology, whatever, people flock to it and they do it. This is really just that end of the pool. Over on the deep end of the pool, where I'm trying to hang out, you have seasoned comic book artists who are like, I don't want to draw New York again before I put Spider-Man swinging over it. Hey, computer, give me a good layout of the city that I can work with, and let's do it with this certain perspective, with a fisheye lens or something. Bam, now they have a basis for it. And it doesn't mean that they now trace that or immediately stick it right into the panel and draw on top of it. Some may, I don't know, but a lot of these guys are just like, no, that's great. Now I'll pencil over this, and I'll be able to get more quickly back to this character, his movement through the city. The city will still look good and be part of the composition, but it's no longer going to be 6 weeks of work for me. It will be 2 weeks of work. And I can spend more time on the character, work with the writer more, make sure my letterer has the spaces he needs. Like those kinds of things, like most of life, is where the rubber meets the road. It's complex. It's more than just, I put a prompt in, it pooped out a thing. Good night, everybody. It doesn't work that way. And you might, and people have said, well, not yet. That's always the answer I hear. Like one day they're just going to write it all for us. I don't know, man. I don't know. Like maybe there's already this problem now where training data is training on itself because it puts out, you put out, and I'm sure you talked about this a bunch on the show, but you pump out enough of this imagery or text for that matter, for the GPTs of the world and stuff. You are going to have a feedback loop from that stuff that is going to start kind of make your work incestuous a little bit. So you end up with like some really weird results. And it's a problem I know AI researchers are trying to deal with and work on.
I think I was going to say, I've run into that myself, because I've been training all these custom models for like backgrounds and character model sheets and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's definitely like it does actually help the model to feed the results of the model, the stuff it outputs back in through it. But you have to make sure that you curate those samples that you're feeding back into it. And a lot of times it involves a lot of touching up and, like taking out all the weirdness, or you're just going to duplicate that and add to it. And eventually you're just going to end up with a mess of a model that doesn't make anything that looks like anything,
Yeah. Like there's also this idea, this concept that if you're an average, let's say you're just kind of an average artist, or, you don't have your own style or whatever it is, but you've got an amazing idea. You pump all this stuff through prompts and tools, and on the other side comes a thing that would happen only if you were a better artist, meaning the tools have made your final output better than it could have been had you been just left with a pen and a piece of paper. But that's the kind of the truth of everything. Like if you really want to come right down to it, there are paintings by the masters. There are Leonardo da Vinci paintings and drawings that were enhanced because he coated it when he was done with special materials that would make it kind of not translucent. What's the word I'm looking for? Iridescent to the eye. There have always been attempts to take what somebody did and then make it look better. Film is great at this. Movies, that's the whole thing with movies. It looks magical almost how good things can look, and photography and stuff in movies is definitely an example of that. But the cases where the human brilliance is the part you want to focus on, the thing that makes it great is what the person made. I think there's a future where these tools and that person / people can coexist and benefit one another. Whether the training data helps the model or the model helps the human, and to what degree, I don't know ultimately. But I do think there's ways to harness this stuff so that we're not selling our artistic souls.
Yeah.
But we're also not Ludditeing ourselves into a cave.
Now, speaking of harnessing, have you taken any looks into sort of training like a custom like Scott Johnson model or anything like that? Have you taken a look into doing some customization work like that?
No, but I've thought about it. I haven't done it. Part of it would be, I know there are open source models that would suit this really well.
Yeah.
I probably should, just because I think there's going to be a need for people to do this. But I think I'm at the moment, I'm more happy to have these tools do peripherals. They're almost like working for me, and they're not the final they're not the final bit of anything I do. They're just tools along the way. And so if that means, I did this the other day. I said I need a really good Wes Anderson color palette, one that's just typical of Wes Anderson. And you can search for these on Google Images and DuckDuckGo and everywhere else. You can find stuff, and you can maybe find something you're happy with, or you can even yourself go to capture some video caps from Asteroid City or something, and say, well, this is the most Wes Anderson looking colors I've ever seen. Let's use these. That's all true and possible and everything else. But AI's quick, and all I have to do is say, I need Wes Anderson colors, and it'll poop out. If you're using poop. Anyway, it'll give me a grid, right, of all these perfect pastels and all these things that just really fit his vibe. And now I've got the color palette I want, and I have it in seconds. And it's also digital right now, which means it's moving around in my digital workspace I already work in. So it's those ways of using it that people aren't talking about. Like people talk about just the put it in a prompt, get the results. And I'm, at least right now, way more interested in what can you do for me in this process? Not, I don't want you to output it because that's boring to me. What I want you to do is help me get there faster, more efficiently, and maybe a few tricks along the way that I haven't thought of. And it's been doing that for me. And so I went from very early on in this, I was a little bit like, I don't, the ethics of some of this, training models using artist work without permission and or compensation is bothersome, still is. Things like that. But, in the photorealistic realm, that's a whole other issue. For photographers, I know have their own concerns because here's my honest opinion. If there really is going to be a war about this, a war of words and intellect, I hope, not guns and swords, it will be between the professional photography community and AI, because now you're just talking about images that are generated based on real. Everything in that image is meant to be as realistic and as photorealistic as possible. That does impact photographers. But in my daughter's case, she's a professional photographer. She does this full time, and she loves Photoshop's generative fill option for some cases. Like, we were in a cramped space. We didn't have the studio space we thought we were going to have. This family that paid for the commission are much larger than we thought. We got cropping issues. We have composition issues. A ton of that can be fixed later with good tools like that. And she still kind of controls the outcome, even though sometimes you get some weird results. But she can mold that into what she wants it to be, and then the client's much happier. So even there are opportunities for them. But I do understand why what I do stylistically or another artist does with their own style, their own taste, their own touch is less at risk in this whole thing, I think, than straight up photo work. That's going to be tricky.
Do you mess around with generative fill very much? Because I find it very, very useful, especially for fixing details on images I generate through Stable Diffusion. You can do in painting in Stable Diffusion where you okay, I'm going to mark out this hand, put a good looking hand there. And you can do that in Stable Diffusion. It's slow, it's janky. Generative fill, I find, is much faster, probably because it's using Adobe's servers. But what do you think of it?
I think it's pretty good. I think it's kind of magical what it pulls off. And I think it's a huge gun in their arsenal. It's funny because right around the time they introduced that, I had fully gotten off the, as I call it, the Adobe teat. I've been using Adobe products since as long as I can remember. Back in a Mac Classic days, I was using Photoshop. And every iteration since then, and when they went to a subscription model and all that, and even for audio production and that sort of stuff. But I made it my goal last year in 2023 to be completely CC free. I just didn't want to. Wow. I don't know why. I'm too many subscriptions. I was just tired of it. I was annoyed, and also they were buggy releases and some other problems. And I was like, well, let's see what we can do. It was almost like an experiment. So I shifted almost entirely on the Photoshop, Illustrator, publisher front over to Affinity Photo. I really like those guys. They're a buy once, use forever, pay for updates. They're, pay for major new releases kind of product, so no subscription. And they are essentially one for one, can do everything those apps do for the equivalent of Adobe apps until generative fill happened, which sounds like a guy we're talking about. I'm generative fill. Anyway, that's a good cartoon. I should think about that. Anyway, when that happened, everybody in those communities that support these smaller tool makers were like, whoa, are we going to have that over here? Are you guys working on something like that? And they are to some degree or whatever, but they haven't really had an answer to Adobe's release of generative fill. And I don't know that they ever will have the power to do that, given, the resources Adobe has versus what they have.
Yeah, and I think Adobe, they're doing most of the processing on their end, which I think probably, adds a lot of the power to it and the speed.
But yeah, I think that's 80% of it probably. But they just, nobody else has quite the answer for it. So it was really smart of them to take the industry standard imaging software and add a thing to it that nobody else is doing. That's massive, and it will benefit them, and people will stay with Photoshop because of it. So it put me in the position of going, yay, I'm free. I'm using nothing but all these other cool tools, some open source stuff for audio and video and some other cool stuff. I'm very happy with this. Oh, shoot, where am I going to get this generative fill? So there was like a moment there where I was tempted to go back and just like sub to Photoshop again, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I have used it a few times. I think it's magical. My daughter uses it, like I said, for her work. Mm-hmm. And it is very cool.
Yeah.
Again, though, I think it actually by design, Adobe's model is actually a really good one because it follows along with what I'm saying. You're not going in there blank and saying, fill this up. I mean, you can, sort of. You can sort of build a thing out if you want to. But what they really are aiming that for and what people are using it for is saying, I'm a photographer. I took this photo in downtown New York City at dusk, and it's exactly what I want, except there's a stop sign in the way, a guy yelling at me, and there's something wrong with the upper corner, and I don't know what happened there. Fix that. And it does it so pristinely that you now have the photo you meant to take. And it was just a tool on the road to get your work, your art to where you wanted it. And so, again, I feel like that's the use case most people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is really fun. Like, it doesn't do great with people all the time. Sometimes it's a bit hit and miss with people, and it's a little too heavy-handed with the censorship. I find, like, if I'm like trying to like fix an elbow or something, it'll think it's a boob, and then it'll be like, no, I can't do it. But besides that, like, I think it's great, and it's nice and speedy. It's very good.
Yeah, it's very cool, and it's like I said, I think it's now industry leading. It's a tool that nobody quite has. Like there are others that have similar stuff. There's like even a TikTok filter that lets you take photos where you're zoomed in and then they zoom out and fill everything in, and it's pretty good. Yeah. It's convincing, but it's not quite there. And you'll see others come around, and heck, the Affinity people who I support will probably end up implementing something similar at some point. I think they kind of have to, but that's kind of why this is the new Battleground. I mean, the Battleground in the 90s was PCs, and the Battleground in the aughts was cell phones and smartphones, and the Battleground now, I think it's this.
Yeah.
This is the thing they're all competing for. Everybody wants your eyeballs for. There's a reason there's volatility with stuff like OpenAI firing and rehiring their CEO in record time and all that crap. It's obvious to me that there is a race on like there hasn't been for a while, maybe since the late 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say this reminds me a lot of like the Netscape, Internet Explorer kind of era where, the 3 or 4 tech companies were like vying for their spot in the pecking order.
Yeah, and they were trying so hard and working so fast. And you can see it happening again where Microsoft's like, shoot, we don't have it. Quick, invest a ton in OpenAI. Okay, cool. We own most of it now. And they do that with money. They always do. You got Google over there going, well, we've been working on this Gemini stuff forever, but we weren't ready. But now OpenAI's eating our lunch, so we got to be ready. So here it is, sort of working. So here's Bard 1.0. It's all right, but then later it's better. And they're all just like scrambling for the hearts and minds of everybody.
Yeah.
GPT got such a leg up, like an 8-month leg up in some ways, and it's making everybody just kind of go, how do we, if you're a major company, like I don't even know what Apple plans to do. Maybe they don't care about this.
I think I've heard they're planning on putting it on the phone somehow, but it's slow to come out, and they have to like do a bunch of. They're trying to do like Adobe doing it all on their their server side,
Yeah.
so the phones don't have to be, $7,000 or whatever.
Yeah, or be,
From the
battery sucking monsters every time they try to do anything. And I'd be interested to see what they do, but it is definitely that moment. We are having that moment again. And as usual, there's like brash startups doing some leading here. And that's fun to watch, because then you see all the old dinosaurs going, oh crap, we have to pivot. Everybody pivot. You ready? All 9,000 of us and 28 offices around the world and 1 million server farms. Let's pivot all at once. Ready? Pivot. Like that's crazy, where scrappy little startups with 20 people on staff to start with are all like, here's the new model. It's awesome. And we already got 8 billion hits today. And that's fun. It's a fun process. It's disruptive, but it's fun.
Yeah, there's a bit of a horse race aspect to it too. Like, who's going to come out with the best model this week? Who's going to be the new winner, sort of thing.
Yeah, you see. I mean, if you think it's competitive now, I think we're just at the cusp of it. It's going to get bananas. And so there, I fully understand why people in the position of, I don't know, let's say you're a staff artist at Disney, or you're an artist on a video game. I always use this video game example because to me this is rubber meets road kind of example. But let's say you're a small developer and you make computer RPGs in the vein of the original Baldur's Gate games or something, and you have a good following, you've had some successful releases, things are going great, but you're a little 12-man team, you don't have a lot going for you money-wise, no big investment, you're not a monster studio. And suddenly, like literally almost overnight, you are told that, hey, that screen where we let people choose from 80 avatar paintings to best represent their character? We no longer have to hire those 4 artists to draw those 80 paintings.
Yeah.
And as much as they used to cost us, all those cost comparisons and everything, we no longer have any of that. In fact, the player will get their own set of faces. No one else will have seen these before because they're randomly generated. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't like what he's seeing, he can put in some parameters so that those faces pop up with, none of them have a right eye or something.
Yeah.
And he can choose his thing on the fly, and they will look indistinguishably painterly from quote unquote the real thing. And it won't cost us nothing. It'll cost us nothing.
Yeah.
Really, in comparison. Why would any small developer not want to do that? They, of course, would want to do that. It's a cost-saving, time-saving, and technologically viable thing they can do in their games. And it means they can ship sooner, reap profit sooner, like all of those benefits of it. Why wouldn't they? If I ran a small studio, I would be all over that. Even though I don't like this idea that the artists who worked their whole lives to get to this position are now going to be out on their butts because they are no longer needed for this particular job. That's why this is so controversial, because...
What could be so controversial? Well, you'll have to stay tuned to find out. Here's a quick word about the Building Dreams Patreon. We'll be right back with more insights from Scott in just a minute.
This episode is brought to you by the Everly Heights Building Dreams Patreon. At everlyheights.tv, Bill Meeks already teaches you how to use the latest AI tech, as he uses it himself to produce animated shows set in the fictional town of Everly Heights, Ohio. Support Bill on Patreon to gain access to an array of exclusive benefits, including his custom AI tools and models, behind-the-scenes content, and engaging Stable Diffusion Q&A sessions. Join the artistic journey and be part of something very special by supporting the project at patreon.com/everlyheights.
So what could be so controversial? Let's tune back into my conversation with Scott to find out.
I don't like this idea that the artists who worked their whole lives to get to this position are now going to be out on their butts because they are no longer needed for this particular job. That's why this is so controversial, because on the one hand, innovation seems rad, and on the other hand, somebody's got to go. And even though they may be able to integrate in another way, that always happens. When Lotus 1-2-3 happened, the entire accounting world went, we're screwed. We're never, the robots are taking our jobs immediately. We are so screwed. And they panicked. And instead, I'm not saying these are one-to-one examples, but instead it increased the number of jobs in the accounting world hand over fist, to the point that the financial services world is gigantic. Why? Automation and computer-based stuff. All of that changed that forever in the positive, and more jobs, more.
Yeah.
Is that same thing going to happen here? It's hard to say yet, but I have a feeling that we'll repeat that a little bit,
Yeah, you're already seeing some of this, like, corporations using this is a really good excuse to, cut jobs. Like Wizards of the Coast just this week, I think, announced a round of layoffs. At the same time, they published job posting for someone to touch up AI artwork. And, obviously, Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, the artwork is a pretty big part of it. So users have very mixed feelings on that right now, for sure.
Yeah, and that it'll be continually mixed. Like, it sounds dystopic if you jump too far ahead before we can get there, where we say your next big HBO prestige drama hit will be made by computers entirely. We're not there. We're nowhere near that, right? And I also think that public perception tempers these things. When Marvel released the Secret War series, and that intro got all kinds of heat for being AI generated.
Yeah.
Poorly, I might add. It looked bad, I thought.
Yeah, that was I believe that was it's called Deforum. It's a plugin for Stable Diffusion they used.
Yeah.
And I've never liked it. Like, it just always looks just a little too crappy for me,
Yeah, that I agree with you. And it was really bad. And a lot of people responded like, this is the future. And my take is like, I don't know. I remember when digital film came around in like 05, 04, and everybody thought, well, this looks bad. It looks like it looks like a daytime soap opera film, this or something. And it did. It looked kind of bad in those early days. Even great films like Michael Mann's forgot the name of the movie, the one with
the Jamie Foxx one.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in a parking garage. I can't remember.
Collateral.
That's it. That's
him and Tom Cruise. One of the best Tom Cruise movies or roles ever. But anyway, that movie is an amazing film, but it was created at a time where this technology was new and it was being introduced into a world that was used to film, and the film looked a certain way. Well, what happened? It's like what everything happens with everything. It's an iterative process. And at first those look kind of janky, especially nighttime shots. And then over time, we are now at a point, it is indistinguishable. The only reason we assume it's even digital now is because most people have moved to it. Like, you got to go to a Tarantino movie to make sure it's film again because he's the only guy doing it.
Yeah, it's an unusual thing to use film now, for sure.
Exactly. It's now flipped the other way. But in terms of our eyes, what we see, what we perceive, those tools have gotten very, very good. But remember, they have only served to help the creative process, not replace it or hinder it. So I'm a pragmatist when it comes to this stuff. It depends on the day you ask me. Today, I'm feeling very pragmatic about it because the biggest problem I have with AI, honestly, is that the tools are so ubiquitous now that it isn't. You don't need to spend $6,000 on a Red camera to make your movie. You can do it on a phone, and you can use a lot of AI tools to do other things. So that misinformation stuff we talked about earlier, the inability for the internet to freaking calm down and breathe, and not just post nightmarish scenarios and things that are either fake or tweaked or whatever. Our power to create poor propaganda with our own fingertips at no cost has never been more real than now. That's the stuff that I don't like. It's not the tech's fault. We're poor stewards of it in a lot of ways. And I hate that.
Yeah, I don't think it's that far removed from, I mean, there have been people making like fake nudes of celebrities and, manufacturing news photos and stuff in Photoshop for 20, 30 years. This just maybe takes away a little bit of the friction, and I don't know, maybe makes it incumbent upon us to be a little bit more critical and skeptical of the things we run across online.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think I said it earlier at the top. I just think our ability to think critically is going to need a booster because, I think I'm pretty good at it now. I'm less reactive than I used to be, and part of it's because the proliferation of this stuff has helped me get there. So in a way, I'm kind of glad it's possible to make a fake, sex tape of somebody famous that's very, very controversial or something, and makes it look like somebody's a very bad person or whatever. I'm kind of glad that it's to a point that people can be fooled by it, because in a way, how do I put this? Like, for me to discern it, I just have to have better skills to discern it. And we all should work on that. As a global community of internet users, I think that's the lesson, because the tools are not going to stop or go away.
Yeah.
We're not going to legislate them away. We may have some moderation here and there. We may have to figure out ways to deal with whatever. But if we want this to be open and available and used in these creative ways, we got to be better at like recognizing some stuff for what it is. In the same way that we learned to when it came to, well, if it's on 4chan, I probably can't trust it as much as if it's on this Reddit I follow that's heavily moderated. Like, we had to learn those things. It's not that different.
Yeah, it all comes down to basic, media literacy and, not taking anything at face value and making sure that, there's something behind before you accept it as a fact,
Yeah, we're just adding new media to the literacy, but it's really the same process. You and I are both heavily involved in the podcasting world, and anybody, anywhere with a microphone and a free account someplace can go post some show claiming anything they want to claim.
Yeah.
Well, somebody's going to hear that stuff and believe it, but I hope more of us will see it and go, I don't trust that source. I do trust this source. That's because these guys have come through 4 or 5 times and also clarified when they were wrong. Like, we have these ways of doing this. It's just, we live in such a fast-paced world, and this stuff changes so quickly that nobody feels like they have time to stop, think, and then react instead of just react. But I think those skills are going to be like valuable moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they always have been, but I mean, especially now.
Yeah.
So, we've talked quite a bit about generative AI art. We did kind of touch on, ChatGPT and the chat bots and stuff like that. You kind of have a side of you that is a writer too. Are you finding yourself using tools like that for any specific use cases in your work?
So a couple of use cases and again, it's funny, it's such a side thing, but ChatGPT has become invaluable for me. I'll just use one show as an example. Once a week, I do a really big 3.5-hour video game show called Core. And on that show, we talk everything from big industry stuff down to little tiny games we played and everything in between, phone calls, emails, all that stuff. By the end of that thing, my notes are gargantuan for a 3.5-hour show. And I'm not even talking like transcription or anything. I mean, just like all our talking points plus a few things we came up with on the fly. It's a lot. So what I do now, I have this big spreadsheet for our show notes. When we're done, I copy all the cells out of the spreadsheet in one big ugly text ball. I paste it into ChatGPT in particular, although Bard is actually doing this a little better now than GPT is, this one use case. Because I've been experimenting. But I basically say, can you take all of this and give me a nice, concise 700 character or less paragraph that sums it up for me, please? I always say please. I don't know what's wrong with me. That's a weird thing. Got
to be nice to the robots for when they take over.
That's what everyone says, but I cannot not do it. Like they have whatever they've crossed whatever line it is where I feel some empathy toward it, because when I give it a big job like that, I'm like, oh, thanks so much for doing it. Like, I really do get thankful. And I don't know how that's going to go in the future. But anyway, and it does it quickly. And I'll get this perfect little paragraph that I may have to go 1 or 2 words and change them. If that. Sometimes it's just straight up perfect the first time. And then I've got a copy and pastable summation of the show that I put in all the show notes. I put on the RSS feeds, a thing that used to take me forever to go eyeball and go, oh, yeah, we talked about this. And I make my own 700 character or less thing.
Yep.
And that has been a huge for me as a tool. What's funny is just the last one I did, I always ask it the same line every week. Take this huge thing, reduce it to 700 characters or less. I don't know why 700 is where I am, but that's where I am. So I tell it that. It comes back with one that's about 1,800 characters. And I said, that was not 700 characters. And it goes, yeah, you're right. Here's the real one. And it pooped out the real one. That doesn't seem cool. Like that bothered me a little bit because it felt like very assumey, like the
Well,
computer's they may not really want 700 characters, so I'll just, I give them
it's
this
like
one.
I think it's, they call it AI, so you assume it to be intelligent, and it's not necessarily always all that intelligent, and it's also very easy to trick. Like there's so many like little hacks you can do with ChatGPT where if you're I'm going to call your manager and you'll get a better answer, sort of thing.
Yeah. It is kind of like a weird, like it may even know better than me. Maybe the 1,800 characters were a way better idea, But it just felt funny to say, the one rule I gave you about character limit, you ignored it and just gave me whatever numbers. And it was like apologetic. Yeah, I went over. Anyway, here's the 700 character version. And it was fine. So I don't know. I'm still grappling with some of those issues, but
yeah,
the actual time that saves me every Thursday is kind of immeasurable at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a half hour off my post-show time, which means I get more exposure to ads, which means my show's up there longer, which means the patrons are happier. Like there's real world benefits to that time savings.
Yeah.
And that's a lot different though than saying, write me an entire thing of show notes for a show tonight and then have an AI voice say it all. Use 11labs.io and let's use that guy's voice. Like nobody's doing that. And when they start to do that, we'll know they're doing that. At least right now, as the technology is, like that's not no one is asking for an AI podcast. Nobody.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Why? I don't think it's. I mean, it may be interesting as an experiment, just like me saying, "Show me, Bill Meeks with 3 eyes and a 4th nipple." I don't know why you have 3 nipples at default. Yeah, you in college. But you know what I mean? Like that's a fun one-off. Like, oh, weird. Look what it did. It did a thing.
Yeah.
And the weirder, the better, because that's interesting for us to see because it's discordant and funky. But when it's actually really, really good at all of that and say, make me a today's news summed up in a 15-minute podcast with commentary from multiple fake guests, I'm not interested in that at all as a listener. And I don't think many people are.
And I think like when you ask, these chatbots and stuff to do something like that, yes, there's a lot of content there, and yes, there's information in it, but it doesn't flow like it does when a human writes it. It doesn't quite kind of grab your attention and guide your attention through the statement like a human does. I think whether we're talking ChatGPT, we're talking Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, whatever. I think the thing that separates it between being a toy and being a tool is a knowledgeable person like you or me or somebody else listening out there to go in and fix all the mistakes. It's a great way to get a quick rough draft, but you still need to do a lot of work to get it to something that it is useful to people or entertaining to people.
Right. And I think that's what people forget is this stuff's not going to automate your life away.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be those people in, what was the Pixar movie where they're all just rolling around on hover things?
WALL-E.
WALL-E, yeah. It's not going to be like that. Like it might, I don't know. Maybe there is some dystopic future where we get there. I just think that we're really good at expressing our fears of this stuff in our art. So films, we do things like Terminator, and we do things like, I don't know, just think about just about anything that we do about the unknown. We talk about the scary parts of the unknown. It's very rare that we just are fully optimistic about the unknown as a human beings. It's not in us to do that. And so it's fun to explore that, have our Mad Maxes over here. And then in the real world, though, what usually happens is this slow rising road of improvement, of technological advancement, our understanding and use cases for it. And it may have its dips and its turns, but for the most part, it's sensible for humans moving as we move forward. And I really believe that. Like I'm not afraid of what's next. I'm more afraid about, like I say, about people. The technology itself is not what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of how people may treat one another using it, and at what level can they do that. But the technology itself is only going to help me. It will only help search engines. It will only help other aspects of our lives where we need better results, especially in the digital world where right now, we've kind of maxed out what we can Google search. We've maxed out how well you can SEO that Google search. Like we've done all that. We've got about as good as we can. What do we need next? Just a little bit more nuance, and suddenly it's a whole new world of possibilities. And I feel like we're at that nuance level of like, oh, the possibilities are crazy. Like what you get your Echo to do for you now. Imagine what it could do if it was actually smart and not stupid. You know? And they're planning that. Amazon's got all kinds of plans for that service that I'm excited to use it. I have I think 5 of those in the house, and I want to see what that's about. And I could easily get nervous about it and go, oh, if I thought they had a listening device in my house before, now they're training on everything they hear. And it's like, yeah, but I don't know. What else are you going to do? You going to go build a log cabin and never come out? Like, what are you going to do?
I was thinking about actually Ted Kaczynski in it, but maybe that's not the right choice. I think you've convinced me of the opposite now, Scott. So I appreciate it.
Good.
My wife and children will be glad that I won't be making national news. So.
Oh, that'll be good. I don't want to see you on there either, to be honest. America's Most Wanted.
Speaking of Ted Kaczynski, I have something I wanted to show you real quick. Let me pull it up here. 10 years ago yesterday, I tweeted out a picture that you responded to, and I just wanted to pop it up here real quick. It was when the side of my face blew out because I had a tooth infection, and I tweeted out this picture from in front of the dentist office, and then you responded here. Let's see, dude, what happened? Oh man, I am so sorry. I had a thing like this a few years ago. Miserable business that. And then every time I've talked to you since then, you've brought it up. So this time I got to bring it up.
You got the jump on me, dude.
I did.
You totally did. I remember seeing that at the time. I have a very specific memory of seeing this and going, oh my gosh, that's so big. It's like a whole other face added onto your normal face.
Oh,
it
yeah.
Still freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
It was crazy because I remember our mutual friends, Brian Brushwood and Justin Robert Young, had a show on, I believe on Twitter at the time, called NSFW. Yeah. And I spent most of the night making a video for their show because I used to do that. Like I'd make some sort of like little 30, 40, 50-second joke video for their show. So I spent the evening doing it, and I was getting like really weird and like tired and a little bit of a fever. I was like, I don't know what's going on. And so I finished the video. I sent it off. I didn't even watch the show. I went to bed and I woke up like that.
Oh, geez. That's gnarly, man. I'm like, I mean, what did they have to do? Take your tooth out or something, or what was the?
Yeah.
thing?
They ended up having to pull it and put in a different one. But it was just like I had like a little cavity that I didn't get taken care of for a couple of years because I was young and dumb, so then just one morning it just decided, okay, well we're gonna make you, I don't know, like a Bluto from Popeye or something with the big blood.
Yeah, mine didn't manifest so much in my head and my face like that as it did. Just I had this very similar thing. I had a root canal go bad, and it was it was awful, dude. It was one of the worst things. They finally just yanked the whole tooth out, which I guess is what happened to you. But they just extracted the whole freaking thing. And I remember thinking I would never let a tooth get to that point again, ever.
Oh, yeah. I will say that I was a little irregular going to the dentist before this. After this, I'm at least once or twice a year kind of guy on the dentist.
Yeah, it has a way of making you way more careful about your teeth when you have an experience like that.
All right, I'm going to take that away so we don't barf. Okay, Scott. So thank you so much again for talking to me today. It's been a great conversation. If people want to follow what you do, can they find that stuff?
You can find everything I'm up to over at frogpants.com, and that includes the podcast. There are a number of them. I produce, 8 shows now or something. Everything from morning shows to the big video game show I talked about, kind of a bunch of other stuff in between. So chances are something you might enjoy. And on the art side, which is a lot of what we talked about today, you can find that on the same site as well. In fact, those 25 Santas I'm working on, you can find those at frogpants.com/Santa right now. I got to come up with today's still. I haven't done it. But anyway, always something fun popping at frogpants.com. So go check it out.
May I suggest Santa with a big abscess tooth, swollen jaw?
Why not? He's supposed to go deliver all these gifts and he has to deal with this now? Oh, man. What a pain. What a pain, literally.
All right, Scott. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Read the stories and join the team at everlyheights.tv. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Everly Heights. Watch us build Everly Heights in Building Dreams by subscribing to @BillMeeksLA on YouTube. Get access to the custom Stable Diffusion models we're using to build Everly Heights, as well as our morning meeting production diary, by supporting us at patreon.com/EverlyHeights.